Together, the regions of Provence and the Languedoc-Roussillon harbour in a small area the densest concentration of remnants of the past and some of the finest examples of ancient Rome. The Romans, the great engineer builders, built a road to link Rome to Spain. That road was called the Via Domitia. It's the oldest road in France and was the first constructed outside Italy. Following this road, we retrace the footsteps of the Romans and go back in time for an exceptional journey. Around the year 600 BC, Greeks from the town of Phocaea, now in Turkey, crossed the Mediterranean and settled on the banks of Gaul, thus founding Marseille under the name of Massalia. In 125 BC, Massalia was threatened by tribes of Gauls in revolt, and so called on Rome, its ally, for help. Rome sent legions led by consul Caius Sextus Calvinus. The Celts were defeated in the course of 2 military campaigns, and the Romans established the first permanent Roman camp in Gaul in 122 BC. In Aquae Sextiae, now called Aix-en-Provence. Cnaeus Domitius Aenobarbus succeeded Caius Sextus Calvinus as consul of Transalpine Gaul, and successfully continued the war against the Gauls who had perpetrated the revolt originally. After his triumph in Rome, Cnaeus Domitius Aenobarbus came back to Gaul leading a new army and a group of settlers. In 118 BC, he created the first Roman colony in Gaul and gave it the name of Narbo Martius, the town dedicated to the god Mars. Narbonne then gave its name to the first Roman province in Gaul, Narbonensis, also called Provincia, which we now call Provence. At this time, Provincia stretched over a very wide area, from Toulouse up to Lake Geneva. With the finest Roman wall paintings in France, the town's archaeological museum clearly demonstrates its glorious past. The museum also houses the oldest military boundary stone in Gaul, It dates from 118 BC and bears the name of Cneius Domitius Aenobarbus, the creator of Via Domitia. After the creation of the town, the Roman Senate decided to build a less hazardous inland road to go from Rome to Spain. Cneius Domitius Aenobarbus was made responsible for its construction. Thus was built the road to which he gave his name, the Via Domitia. A trophy measuring 35 metres by 30 at its base was erected here by General Pompey in the year 71 BC. It commemorated his victory over Quintus Sertorius, the governor of Hispania Citerio, later called Spain, who had revolted against Rome. The trophy bore the names of 876 people who had been defeated. From the border, the Via Domitia split into two routes, one inland and one following the coast. The mountain route followed the gorges of the Rhone River, protected by two Roman forts. These two forts, Fort de la Cluse Haute and Château des Morts, or Castel del Moros, faced each other and made it possible to maintain a garrison at the border of the provinces of Narbonensis and Tarraconensis. At the base of the Rhone gorges was a portorium, a customs building straddling the Roman road which had heavy gates. Travellers passing through had to pay a toll calculated on the value of the goods they were transporting. The Via Domitia then passed very close to Fort de Salces, to the north of Perpignan, near which was an existing Roman fort called Font Salsulet. It then continued to Narbonne. The economic power of Narbonne did not only depend on maritime activities, but also on local resources: fishing, oyster beds, curing or salting, and mining. The surrounding countryside was divided into large agricultural properties. Wheat, olive trees, and vines were grown there. The wines made here were well known. These products were exported all over the empire by land and sea. This necessitated an enormous number of amphora and pottery. The large workshops which produced them were situated not far from the town. One of the largest was discovered in Salelles d'Aude, a few kilometres from Narbonne. The workshop stretched over 3 hectares and included a clay quarry, settling tanks, storage areas, outbuildings, and 17 kilns of various shapes and sizes. The pottery, dating from the years 20 to 30 BC, specialised in the production of amphorae for winemaking. Amphoralis, the Gallo-Roman Potters Museum, has become a unique place with a cultural and archaeological interest of the highest order. Like a bridge, it spans the site and shows the making, firing and trading of the pottery. An earth kiln has been reconstructed for the purpose of research and experiments, but also to educate the visiting public. The materials have been handmade with clay, and its construction was carried out according to the techniques observed by the original constructors. Narbonne was a crossroads between Via Domitia from Italy to Spain and Via Aquitania that went up towards Toulouse and Bordeaux. Via Aquitania first leads to Carcassonne, a Roman town built on the site of the former oppidum of Gaul and now occupied by the famous medieval town of Carcassonne. Via Aquitania then passed through the town of Bram on its way to Toulouse. In ancient times, Bram was a Gaul settlement by the name of Eburomagus, which meant the ewe market, or the market of Eburos. From the time of Augustus, Eburomagus grew very quickly and became an important centre for pottery production. Bram has a museum with a clear and modern presentation of the results of excavations in the area. The collection of the Maison d'Archéologie show the importance of this ancient site for the whole region. The Oppidum of Enserune, to the south of Béziers, is one of the most important pre-Roman sites in Europe. Before the Roman conquest, France was the country of the Celts, also known as Gauls, who lived in tribes and settled in villages that were fortified and built on high ground for security. These were called Oppida. The Gauls were able craftsmen and fierce warriors. They had built dirt tracks between these Oppida, which were reused by the Romans. The remains of Enserune are characteristic of the pre-Roman habitats of the south of France. Fragments of pottery found during excavations carried out since 1915 allow us to see the progressive integration between the Celts and the Mediterranean civilizations. The Greco-Roman influence in Enserune is clear. It can be seen in the building techniques used in the new forms of settlement and the presence of capitals and columns inspired by Ionic and Doric orders. The Roman influence can also be seen in the use of mortar. Gaul oppida were common along the Via Domitia. The Romans built their roads so that they either ran through a Gaul village or passed at the foot of an oppidum every 25 to 30 kilometers, which was roughly a day's journey at normal speed. These oppida were transformed into Roman settlements, or civitas, and became stopping places for travelers, offering a bed and a meal for the night, called mansiones. Despite these changes, Enserune kept its indigenous character for a long time. No public monument or cultural building has been identified here. The museum, dedicated to the site, holds an important collection of objects from Celtic, Greek, and Roman civilizations. Before the building of the Via Domitia, a road already existed that the Greeks had called the Heraclean Way, referring to the legend of Hercules returning from Erythea, that is from the delta of Guadalquivir in Spain, who is said to have taken the road to return to Mycenae, bringing the oxen that he had taken from Geryon, the three-bodied giant. The Greeks introduced to Gaul from the south the cultivation of olive trees and initiated the grafting of vines. They gave the region the Mediterranean style that contributes so much to its charm today. From its ancient past, Béziers has the Pont Vieux, or Old Bridge, which took the Via Domitia across the river Aube. The squandrels between two arches were perforated with arched openings to avoid the bridge acting as a dam in case of flood. These 9 arches of the bridge are built according to the same design as the other bridges of the Languedoc. It has been carefully preserved to this day. There is a walking trail of around 8 kilometres between Loupien and Pinet, where the Via Domitia can be followed on foot through the garrigue or scrubland. The route offers a magnificent view over the Lake of Thau, that was already well known in Roman times for its fish production. Roman roads were paved at the entrance or inside of towns, but rarely in the middle of the countryside. More often than not, they were simply dirt tracks. A Roman road had 3 layers. An excavation of the Via Domitia in Pinet allows this to be seen clearly. A layer of rough stone blocks for the foundations, a layer of gravel mixed with sand formed the nucleus, and the last layer composed of a mixture of earth and fine gravel which was tramped down. When it was built, like all Roman roads, Via Domitia belonged to the category of Via Militares, reserved for the passage of the legions. With Roman peace, it became a Via Publicae, a main road of the empire used by traders and travellers, built at the cost of the state and bearing the name of its builder. The Via Publicae were under the direct control of the curator, a high official of the imperial administration. Finally, the Via Vicinales linked the Via Publicae to the towns of the province, or vicus. The site of Ambrusum between Montpellier and Nimes is remarkable for the remains of the Via Domitia, which are mainly paved. The construction of their massive road network obliged the Romans to create stopping places to restore the travellers. Generally, the word mansiones was used to describe stopping places for travellers, and the word mutationes was used for the places to take refreshments and change horses. The mansiones were established every 15 to 20 Roman miles, or every 25 to 35 kilometres, whereas the mutationes were found every 5 to 8 Roman miles. The mansiones allowed travellers to spend the night, change horses and rest. The main criterion in regard to the level of comfort was the possibility of taking a bath. In Ambrusum, a heating room belonging to a spa was discovered. It was probably for public use and can be considered to have been part of the mansiones. In general, though, stopping places had poor reputations, and wealthy Romans often preferred to make their own camps near the road. How did the Romans, the great engineer builders, construct these roads in such straight lines across their enormous empire? We must not forget that the roads were built above all to ease the movement of the legions as quickly as possible, and the fastest road is always the straightest. The engineers of the Roman army, the mensores, used 3 instruments for taking sights. For horizontal measurements, they used a chorobate, a sort of giant spirit level made of a long piece of wood, almost 6 meters in length, inside which was a channel filled with water called a canalis. 2 eye holes, placed at each end, allowed visual sights to be taken after the instrument had been levelled horizontally. The groma is a more commonly known tool. It was used for taking sights at angles and corresponds to the modern set square. It was made up of a cross with 4 perpendicular arms which aligned the direction. A plumb line was suspended at the end of each arm. The instrument was then fixed on a rotating arm that was itself attached to a vertical support that was driven into the ground. The final tool was the dioptre, used for astronomical sights.
Leo, Sinistram, Dextram, Dextram.
Once the surveyor's calculations had been finished, work could begin. Via Domitia left the oppidum of Ambrusum over the bridge that crossed the Vidul River. Today, only one arch remains of the original 11 arches that in total were almost 180 meters long. Two other bridges are worth a detour, even if they are not directly on the route of the Via Domitia. One is Boisseron, and the other Sommières. The bridge at Boisseron allowed a Roman road to link the Via Domitia with the road from Nimes to Lodève by crossing a contributory of the Vidorle, the Bénovis. The Emperor Tiberius built a bridge at Sommières in the year 1 AD. It was 189 meters long and composed of 17 arches. 7 still remain to this day. The other arches were covered over by a medieval town and buried in the cellars of houses, as can be seen here. This arch is called Tiberius's Arch. The bridge crosses the Vidorle and probably led to the road towards Lodève. It is the longest and best preserved Roman bridge in all of the south of France. In 22 BC, the Roman Emperor Augustus divided the territory of Narbonnensis into 22 towns, or civitates. They ranged in size, the largest usually mimicking the outlines of the ancient Gaul settlements. This was the case for Nemosus, Nimes, town of the Volc, also called Arecomique, the full name being Colonia Augusta Nemosensis. The town was protected by ramparts with towers at regular intervals. 43 of them have been identified, and the total number estimated at 80. The most remarkable was erected at the summit of Mount Cavalier, Tour Magne, from the time of Augustus and reusing a pre-Roman tower. The Maison Carrée, or Square House, was a temple which dominated the Forum and was dedicated to Caius and Lucius Caesar, grandson and adoptive son of the Emperor Augustus. It is the only temple of the ancient world that has been completely preserved. The Maison Carrée has borne this name since the 16th century. At that time, any rectangle with 4 right angles was considered as square. Of the buildings given over to entertainment, only the amphitheatre has survived. It was built at the end of the year 1 AD, inside the settlement and near the southern ramparts. But what a building it is! This is the best preserved arena of the Roman world, housing 24,000 people, divided according to their social position, who came to watch gladiator combats or fights against bulls and bears. With its length of 133 metres and width of 101 metres, it is one of the largest amphitheatres in Roman Gaul. An ingenious system of corridors and staircases allowed spectators to get to their places and to leave the amphitheatre quickly. Nimes Archaeological Museum has the largest collection of milestones in the south of France. The construction of Roman roads necessitated distance markers for travellers. Milestones take their name from the fact that they were placed every Roman mile, 1.481 kilometres. These markers were composed of a stone column, 2 to 4 metres in height, and from 0.5 to 0.8 metres in diameter, fixed into the ground. The markers bore inscriptions carved directly onto the stone, or on a special epigraphical plaque. They showed the name of the emperor, his most recent official titles, tribune, consul or imperator, and finally there were numbers giving the distance between the marker itself and the beginning or end of the road. Emperor Augustus had milestones like this placed from Narbonne to Les Pertus and from Narbonne to the Rhône. The Archaeological Museum has a fine collection of gravestones. These were placed along Roman roads at the entrance to the town. Via Domitia left the town of Nimes, heading towards the Rhone through a monumental gate, Pont du Gard, the Gate of Augustus. The gate is made up of two large arched passageways, used by vehicles, and two side passages for those on foot. The castellum is a large reservoir of water supply and is a very rare find. It is carved out of the rock and marked the point at which the aqueduct reached Nimes. Lead pipes then took the water down to the monuments and fountains of the town. Around the middle of the 1st century AD, water was brought to the town of Nimes by an aqueduct that drew its water from the fountain of Ur in Uzes. This aqueduct crossed the valley of Gardon at the famous Pont du Gard. The Pont du Gard is the highest and best preserved aqueduct of the Roman world. The ancient aqueduct was built around the year 50 AD, under the Emperor Claudius or Nero, and the construction took 15 years. The central arch, 48 metres high and 490 metres long, crosses the Gardon with a width of 24.5 metres. It is formed of 3 stories having 6, 11 and 47 smaller arches, of which 12 have been lost. The Pont du Gard is built exclusively of stone from a quarry situated 600 metres away on the left bank of the Gard. The blocks of stone for the pillars and the arches were prepared in the very quarry where they were extracted. They were cut and numbered and then brought to the bank of the Gard where the site engineers received them. The total volume of stone has been evaluated at 50,400 tons. Some single blocks could weigh as much as 6 tons. The aqueduct of Uzes in Nimes was used until the 6th century AD. Before arriving in Beaucaire is the Mas de Tourelles, a Gallo-Roman villa with workshops and pottery kilns, probably dating back from the time of Augustus, between the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. In an area of 135 hectares, vines and probably olive trees were cultivated. Wine production was such that the villa had several kilns whose sole purpose was to produce amphorae. The famous Gaule 4, well known by Gallo-Roman potters in Narbonnensis, allowed the wine to be exported to the 4 corners of the Roman Empire. In Mas de Tourelle, the visitor is plunged into the heart of ancient Rome. The reconstruction of a cella vineria, a life-size cellar in working order, with its wine press, dolia, or large terracotta jars, and its amphorae give precious information about viticulture in the Gallo-Roman period. The impressive wine press was reconstructed from a text by Cato. On the site of Mas de Tourelle, a Gallo-Roman vineyard has also been created, as well as a sacred wood, the place to which Romans went to rest and to pray. In the vineyard, the vines are trained on different supports: trellis, pergola, or olive trees. The town of Orange, which was the Roman city of Arezzo, was built for the veterans of the Second Legion around 40 BC. The triumphal arch on Via Agrippa at the northern entrance to the town celebrates the warrior exploits of the Second Legion. The theatre is still used today in the 21st century for prestigious shows. The remains of its stage wall allow us to imagine how rich the decorations were, which made it famous throughout the ancient world. The archaeological sites of Vaison-la-Romine are exceptional. Far from the Via Domitia, the sites of Puymines et La Villasse give a very clear idea of town living in Gallo-Roman times, when the town was called Vasio. When approaching towns and inside the towns, roads were paved. The archaeological site of La Villasse corresponds to a rich and active part of the town with streets, shops and public baths. The Rue des Boutiques, the street of shops, is one of the most remarkable examples of the layout of Vaison. It is made up of large limestone slabs, arranged in an irregular pattern to reduce the wobbling and lurching of chariot wheels as they passed every day. It was a very important road in the town. It was joined from the east by a wide pavement, and from the west by a pedestrian passage, which can be made out from the columns supporting the upper stories of the buildings here. It was in this street that the inhabitants of the ancient town went to the public baths and to do physical exercise and to bathe. Behind this noisy urban hub, large houses faced inner courtyards, showing a quality of life and luxury reserved for the wealthy. Vaison-la-Romine has exceptional remains of great villas or domus. Dining rooms, reception rooms, kitchen with fireplace and basins, and even toilets, latrines, are all clear indications of the way of life of rich Romans. The town had several sanctuaries and temples devoted to the gods, the emperors, or local personalities. The ancient theatre is evidence of the prosperity of the Roman town of Vaison. It is one of the rare public buildings still visible in Vaison-la-Romine today. Its construction dates most probably from the 1st century AD. The Parc Historique du Beaucaire allows the public to plunge into the past, demonstrating different forms of hand-to-hand combat. The ACTA team explains and demonstrates games from the Roman circus with gladiatorial combat. Via Domitia crossed the Rhone in Beaucaire, entered what is now Provence, and went on to Glanum, near the village of Saint-Remy de Provence. The ancient town was at its height at the time of the first Roman Emperor Augustus. The site has one particularly exceptional feature. It was occupied by the Gauls, then by the Greeks, and finally by the Romans. Glanum was originally occupied by a Celtic settlement, which was quickly taken over by the Greeks. The people of Glanum were part of the Confederation of the Salients. During the last days of independence, authentic Greek constructions, directly inspired by Marseille, were built. Houses with the peristyle, temple, wells and dromos. The Romans, after defeating the Gauls, settled in the town, which became Glanum. They created a large water supply network here, with lead-lined pipes and an enormous network of sewers and drains. They built temples in honor of the emperor and the imperial family, baths, a basilica, a curia, a forum, and continued to venerate the spring where veterans of the legions came to have their wounds healed. Roman doctors had declared the water magical and stated that it healed the body. Agrippa himself came to heal his leg and in thanks had a temple built. Thermes, the French word for Roman baths, included a large courtyard or palestra, the caldarium with hot baths, the tepidarium where the temperature was lukewarm, and finally the frigidarium with rooms that were not heated and baths with cold water. Glanum has very fine remains of villas with peristyles and mosaics. They are evidence of the luxurious art de vivre, or way of life of wealthy Romans. The triumphal arch marked the entrance to the town. With the barbarian migrations, the town was abandoned, and the stone used to build the nearby town of Saint-Remy de Provence. Further south, at the head of the Rhone Delta, the town of Arles owes its origins to Greek and then Celtic occupation. It was the Celts who gave it the name of Arelate, but it was the Romans who really founded the town. Marius had a canal built linking it to the sea. Arles then became a port to rival Marseille. With Roman peace in the 1st century AD, great monuments were built: arenas, theatres, a forum, and public baths. The arena could hold at least 20,000 spectators coming to see the gladiatorial combats. Each story, decorated with Doric and Corinthian pilasters, is formed of 60 archways. also boasts remains of the ancient theatre, a part of the rows of seats, the orchestra pit, and some columns. They are quite evocative and allow one to imagine what the theatre in an ancient Roman city must have been like. In the Middle Ages, alterations were made to the theatre and it was turned into a small fort. The medieval tower still remains today. The town would live to endure invasions by the barbarians and the Arabs. The arena itself was also modified and became a small fortified town. Inhabitants of Roman towns were buried outside the walls of the town where they died. The necropolis of Les Halles Camp, the Elysian Field, along the Via Aurelia, is very characteristic of this phenomenon. During the late Roman Empire, the Emperor Constantine stayed here several times, and Arles was even for a time the prefecture of the Gauls. The emperor had baths built bearing his name. Although located to the south of Via Domitia, Arles still found itself at an important crossroads of communication routes. While Via Domitia went on through the Alps, another road went down from Beaucaire, formerly Glanum. To go along the coast and reach Italy, this was called the Via Aurelia. Via Domitia followed former Gaul dirt tracks, and then the Greeks' Heraclean Way, the Road of Hercules. In the Middle Ages and in modern times, all large new roads have closely followed the route of the Roman road, whether for the railway or for the motorway named La Longa do Siena. No other region of France is so steeped in ancient Rome, and Via Domitia is still the finest way to discover it, and to really feel as if one is getting away from the modern life.